Okay, maybe we'll get started. I'm sure people will jump on as we go. So thank you all for making time to participate in this Zoom conference. I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I'm Michael Falk, Vice Dean for Undergraduate Education. Also on the line is Reese Sarma, who's the Vice Dean for Graduate Education in the Whiting School. Paul Huckett, who's our Assistant Dean for Life Design and Innovation in our Engineering for Professionals program, is here, as is Nathan Graham, Director for the Center for Digital and Media Initiatives from EP. They'll be talking a bit later to present some of the things, resources they've surfaced. And Brian Cole was to join us, but I understand he's tied up in a consultation at the moment. So Mike Reese from the Center for Educational Resources will be talking to you as well today. So just to get started, I wanted to let you know how we plan to use this time. So I'm gonna just take 5 minutes to just sort of set the stage, talk about what the goals are for this session and some just general guidelines for where we're at and how to approach our current situation. Then Mike Reese from CER will briefly review the resources that are available on the CER's website. Those are not specific to design and lab courses, but many of those tools are the same ones we'll be talking about using in the specific context of a design lab or project-based course. Then Paul and Nathan will talk about some overarching suggestions, guidelines, resources for enacting lab or project-based courses remotely. And then we're hoping to open up the floor for you to tell us the ideas that you're generating for how to deal with the current situation and to share ideas, and also for me to gather information and Sri to gather information about how we can understand what kinds of support we could provide in this moment to make this possible. I think it's important to note at the beginning of this discussion that none of us would choose to move into remote instruction, that this is a very challenging moment for us because the whole reason for Johns Hopkins relies on the value that's inherent in high-touch, hands-on education. So we're clearly only doing this because this is an emergency situation and we're having to adapt as best we're able. Having said that, in this moment, maintaining the highest possible quality of education during this period is incredibly important, both to our students so that they get an excellent education, but also to just our school's reputation. And so we know this is going to be difficult, right? But essentially, if we're unable to do this, if we fail at this task, the consequence is interrupted education for hundreds of students. And that's really a very dire consequence that we want to avoid at all costs. So we're just trying to pull together what resources we have, and we have many very talented and creative faculty. So your ideas are key amongst those, and to try to move forward as best we can. I think one of the issues that I just wanted to talk about up front is that I think as engineering instructors, we tend to have a tendency to focus on the task at hand, and in particular, the interaction that we have, that our students have with the material world, because that's like the key to our profession often is knowing how to manipulate the material world. So we're thinking about the go-kart that the students are having to build. How are we possibly going to do that remotely? The cells they're supposed to be culturing, how is this possible? The distillation column that they're supposed to be running and analyzing. So I think we have to first acknowledge that not all of the things that we would routinely do in order to teach these classes are we going to be able to do. Many of these things are just not going to be possible in the remote teaching modality. But I think the way to approach it is not to give up. It's to realize that those tactics, those actions, those things that we enact with the students are really themselves means to an end, that we have to keep our eyes on the end, which is that we have articulated learning objectives that we're trying to instill in students, habits of mind, ways of understanding things, understanding how things work, understanding how to work with something. And we may be able to get at those learning objectives in other ways that don't necessarily rely on the activities that we can't enact in the remote environment. So, Brian.
Sure. Would
do you want to take control of the screen, or
would you mind if I share my screen?
Absolutely. So I stopped my share.
So my name is Brian Cole. I'm with the Center for Educational Resources on the Homewood campus. And in anticipation of this, for the past week or so, we've been developing some communication strategies. So when you're talking about moving a course online, I think the primary recommendation that most things you will read will say will be to keep communication lines open between you and your students. So we've tried to model that and have good communication resources for the faculty that we need to help. The first one of these is keepteaching.jhu.edu. People can see this screen, yes?
Yep, I can.
Okay, so the first one of these is keepteaching.jhu.edu, which was developed in coordination with the provost. The point of this site is to unify university communication so that we can give out one URL. And then if you need more specific information for your school, you would be down here. So I'll show you where this goes in a second. But this site also contains more administrative type questions. These are recommendations, general recommendations about moving from teaching face-to-face to teaching remotely. And these frequently asked questions deal with more administrative questions like, can I just cancel my class? Am I allowed to give an in-class exam? If I need to self-isolate, what should I do? So these are things that the provost has an official answer to, and this is where you find those answers. For instructional technology resources and questions for the face-to-face faculty on the Homewood campus, we've modified the CER website, which is cer.jhu.edu. And we've put the main link here, and on every page, it says, do you need to teach remotely? So this is where we've consolidated our resources. We have a series of in-person and online trainings that we've scheduled for the next 7 days. We have a series of our own questions that are with specific answers that are applicable to people who teach face-to-face in engineering. So there's a lot of different solutions for a lot of these problems. But what we've found is that giving people 10 different ways to do something is not necessarily helpful all the time. We have a recommended way to do things and then talk about other options if they work better for you. The CER, which is located in the Homewood campus and the MSC library, is also committed to staffing for in-person consultations. As long as the library is open, we'll be here in person with extended hours. I think that Nathan and Paul will end up talking about some of these tools, but when you expand a tool like how do I facilitate seminar discussions, you end up talking about Zoom and then mentioning things like Teams and Piazza and Blackboard discussions. So we have individual pages for things like Zoom and Teams and Panopto and the tools that are applicable to the face-to-face faculty in engineering. We have training about all of those topics, both scheduled training on this calendar and in demand. And then the other thing that I would just like to mention is that both of these documents, the Keep Teaching page and the CER Frequently Asked Questions page, they're all living documents that we're updating, if not hourly, then at least 2 or 3 times a day. So the provost sends me updates for Keep Teaching, and faculty have been sending us updates for the Frequently Asked Questions. So the documents are very much in progress. Nothing is set in stone. If there are things that the faculty want answered, that haven't been answered, we can consolidate the answers here. We've also been in touch with many faculty from engineering who have their own solutions, which we're going to share out on this site as well. So these are people that one of our groups have worked with in the past, and they've developed a way that they like to do this kind of thing, whether it's recording on an iPad or using Zoom in a particular way. So they already have a solution that's working for them for this purpose and their faculty. So we find that sharing that is very instructive for other faculty. So we have a number of faculty we work closely with, and we're going to put some of their solutions up on here as well. So I don't want to take up too much time, and I'll stop sharing the screen. But that's an overview of what we're doing here at the CER, in addition to answering a whole lot of email. So,
are there any specific questions for Brian before we pass the baton again? Remember to unmute if you're muted.
I'll also say that I've been doing a number of departmental trainings in person for groups of 5 to 20, and that's mostly been in Krieger, but I'm happy to do that for any engineering department as well. Some people like to do things online. Some people like to do things in person. Some people like to bring in their laptop. We're trying to accommodate all those modes of getting up and running with these alternative teaching strategies.
Great.
So first, Michael, thank you for inviting us to have some of the time during this meeting. Thank you for everyone showing up. So just to introduce ourselves again, I'm Paul Huckett. I'm the Assistant Dean for Learning, Design and Innovation. Our major client that we serve is the Engineering for Professionals program. And so myself and Nathan, who's joining me today, have extensive experience with doing this for online instruction and what we call virtual live instruction, which is synchronous online. And so we have a lot of experience collaborating with faculty and also teaching in those environments. And we hope to share that with you today. There's a couple of things I just want to share with you before I jump into the details of this. Number one is this is not a conspiracy theory by us to get you to teach remotely. That is, I want to clear that up. The second thing is an object that's in my office that reminds me to stay calm and carry on. I think there's opportunity here for us to stay calm and do the best we can in the situation. There's a couple of points that Michael made that I just want to touch on. Obviously, this is not by choice that we're here, but we have to think about high quality. We have to think about, and when we think about that, we have to think about the art of the probable and the art of the possible. But we, being myself, Nathan, and Mike's team, Mike Reese's team, are here to support you in anything that you need. So again, just as the goal of this workshop is to provide practical, high-level, tactical approaches to adapting labs, design, and project-based courses for remote delivery. We're focusing on 4 core areas. Number 1 is content delivery, both synchronous and asynchronous. We're focusing on interaction. How can you interact with your students, and how can they interact, as they will now be participating in a remote experience? The learning activities that you can use, again, to, we're not going to directly replicate the experience they can have in a lab, but what can we do around the technologies that are available to us to still give them some hands-on experiences? And number 4 is assessments. And so before I dig into the details here, I do want to say here are some strategies that you can think about. But as Mike Reese suggested, as you start to think about your individualized solution, reach out to us and we will make sure that you have the support necessary. I just want to make that clear that this deck is not about individual techniques specific to one course. It's things you can think about, and then we are here to support you as you think about those custom solutions. So the basis of our strategy, we've talked about this a wee bit, but we serve Johns Hopkins Engineering for Professionals program extensively with over 350 online asynchronous and synchronous courses. You've likely seen this, I think, Mike, you might have shared it out at some point, where there's a Google sheet that's going around with over 200 links to institutions that have done some contingency planning around teaching. And so we've done a review of all of those web pages, and we've curated them in this deck right now around kind of what are the best practices and techniques and technologies that we can use. And then also the resources we have available through instructional design, instructional technology, and media between the centers that are accessible to all WSE faculty. Again, I've talked about this, but now's the time to start thinking about creativity in your teaching and again, thinking about solutions that will work best to meet the learning objectives. So I'll now jump into content delivery, but for this, I'll hand it over to Nathan.
Thanks, Paul. So over here we have some resources that we can provide. You can either self-record your lecture in a lab. So this is a way to capture the facilities, the equipment, demonstrations on how you can use them. We'll get into later on how you could potentially simulate those experiences and let them get their hands on it for recording your own demonstrations. And that could be a webcam. Simply clip to a gooseneck camera stand, you clip it onto something, you show a whiteboard, you show your equipment, you stream it through Zoom. Another option would be we can provide you with media support. So we have multimedia technicians over here with really high quality equipment, and they can help you do exactly what Paul is showing right here. So this is an example of what's called a interactive photosphere. So it lets you walk through a lab and then have clickable elements wherever you'd like. We helped Stephen Faria set this one up. So he's demonstrating different equipment inside the lab, how to use it. And some of these have high resolution photos, and lets you go room to room and sort of experience it. So this is just one example of the type of thing we could do. Another would be, we have something called a light board. You guys have probably seen that. Equipment demo, so we have macro cameras, webcams that you can use, plug them into your computer as you're teaching through Zoom. Live, show them how to work through, in this case, looks like some sort of circuit board, and demonstrate. Then you could also do light board or Samsung Flip. Samsung Flip is just a giant iPad essentially, and you can do annotations on it and demonstrate things for students. And similarly, the light board, it's like a giant iPad, but you can write on it with markers.
Thanks, Nathan. I think the key thing to keep in mind here is what things you can teach live, right? So what can you do while you're teaching through Zoom? Some of those things may be sharing your screen or having your webcam set up. And if there's a whiteboard behind you, you can annotate directly on that whiteboard. So there are techniques that you can use directly through Zoom. You can also, as Nathan suggested, have some type of clip-on camera that you could walk around the facility. And so this can all be done synchronously live via Zoom. You can also think about, and we can support, any kind of digital assets that you'd like side of the live streaming. So again, if it's photosphere, if it's just images, whatever you want to best replicate the physical environment, we can support you in that. Obviously, we have to keep an eye on volume, but our goal is to support you so that you can provide a really high quality experience to the students. So the second thing I'll caption here is interaction, right? You're used to interacting with students in an on-site location, and now the students are going to be remote. So how do I interact with students, and how do they interact? There's a couple of ways in which you can do this. The first one is obviously by policy, it's going to be remote teaching. So at your same time that you would have your regular class, you're now going to be teaching that remotely via Zoom. There's links and resources in here, specifically a Zoom teaching strategy resource that I recommend taking a look at. And just an FYI, this deck will be shared with you after this presentation. But in that guide, it teaches you how to, for example, do breakout rooms in which you wanted to incorporate active learning and group-based work. All of that can be done inside of the technology. Another technology we have here that we support and recommend is Microsoft Teams. It's supported through our Microsoft Office 365 subscription that we have. There's a help guide here, but this is a modern, easy platform that has a mobile application in which you can interact with your students, or if you wanted to, you could just set up a team and the students can use that to interact, which I think in this very difficult time would be really helpful. Right? They're all in remote locations. The ambiguity is probably a little bit scary for everyone. And so having this dialogue and this kind of peer support network, I think would be helpful. You can do the same thing, although albeit not through a mobile application, but through the Blackboard discussions. So the learning management system, Blackboard, as a discussion forum in which you can interact and share ideas. And then finally, Piazza is a fantastic tool as well for kind of Q&A style discussions. So there are resources linked on this slide right here I encourage you to check out. Just one other thing I should have mentioned at the beginning. If you have questions, just jump in. Let's make this interactive. If you have questions on a specific slide or technique or technology, just jump in. So learning activities, so I'll hand this back over to Nathan.
Yep, so a lot of you may be aware, but we have virtualized services here on campus already available to us. So Hopkins MyCloud, you can access it through my.jh.edu, and they provide virtualized desktops. So say your student doesn't have a powerful laptop, they can access MyCloud and run MATLAB and various other applications. You can also, if you have a specific application for your course like Cadence or something like that, you can work that may be too expensive to even ask them to install or run themselves. You can have them, it's the MyCloud team, they're probably very busy right now, but you can have them install applications that you use specific to your course, and only your students will be able to access it. And they'll be able to so this is a good replacement for physical labs, maybe software that you had them accessing in a physical lab. And Vocarium lets you access remote labs. Vocarium will have some pre-planned scripts and labs built out for you, so you can provide those to your students. Courseware and OE and OER also provide you with those sort of options where you can search for relevant resources and use them in your course without you having to do something completely new all of a sudden.
Yeah, Nathan, I just wanted to share this slide. This is later in the deck and kind of additional resources, but this is a curated list from what we gleaned from the peer review websites. And so this is a kind of a curated list of all of the technologies that are available that we think would be most applicable, but this isn't a done deal. There are technologies that I'm sure you're all aware of, and so if you do have technologies, feel free to share them with us and we can continue to add to this list.
On that note, there's you could also use simulations, and so this is a little more heavy, and unless you already have experience in it, it might be too late for that, but you can use Simulink and PSpice and different applications like that to provide them with a virtual tool and modeling. And we provide online learning authoring tools, Camtasia, and Explain Everything, so you could also help build your course out. Again, these are more ideal solutions. I think Zoom is the more tactical approach. That's probably more realistic for most of you. And then this may be obvious, but providing raw data to students and having them work with that is a powerful way to get them conceptually involved in the process. Hardware materials, this will be totally dependent on your program and the budget realities, but we work with ECE and Space Systems Engineering and chatted with them, and they do provide, for some classes, they mail hardware kits. So they found out what the learning objectives were. They found out that they didn't necessarily need to provide them with $1 million equipment. They found to achieve their learning goals that they could do that with a $200 kit. So they put that kit together. Some of them are ready-made, have it mailed to the students, and the students use those kits. In addition, they could use available maker spaces in the area, such as 3D printers, etc.
So finally, before we hand it over for questions and really an opportunity for us to learn from you about some of your challenges as well, I'll just capture assessments. So we've had this question a lot, and so I think it's really important to capture some of the ways in which you can assess learning. And so I'll talk about how this can be done inside of the technologies and some strategies. But obviously you can have students submit work products directly in Blackboard, the learning management system. You can have those work products be run through a plagiarism detection tool. Now in Blackboard, you can enable this in assignments. And so it will run through a plagiarism detection of scanning the databases and crawling websites, and will generate a report for you. You can also use Turnitin, in which you build the assessment in Turnitin, and it's a similar tool. There are other ways you can think about oral examinations. So again, making sure that students have an understanding of the material and can demonstrate that in some way, whether or not that students doing presentations, group presentations, whatever it may mean, so that they and you can ensure that the learning objectives have been met. And then finally, this is a really important piece, and we've heard this a lot as well about the use of proctoring tools. We are not recommending the use of proctoring tools for a number of reasons. Number one is it's expensive. Number two is that it requires a lot of technical support for both usually the faculty member who's using it and the students. And so there's hardware and software questions and issues that come up here, for example, lockdown browser or some other things that ultimately will require a lot of support. The third thing is that this is probably going to be more time that you'll have to spend, right? Because it's recorded using a proctoring tool. Students access it at any time they want. It's recorded and then things are flagged. If there's suspicious behavior, it's flagged and then that's sent to you. That will mean that you will have to spend time outside of your usual teaching hours to look at that and look for the red flags. We don't think that's a good use of time. What we think is just as effective and a lot easier is to have examinations that are run through Zoom, right? And so traditionally you'd have this in an on-site environment. And again, this may not be pertinent to everyone, especially those who have design or project-based courses, but now's a time we need to start thinking about different types of assessments. If that assessment is an exam, you can have the students show up the same time, same place, that place being Zoom, and you can just monitor what's going on. And so that's the recommended approach that we're pushing out to all of our kind of clients. That will, again, drastically reduce the risk of academic misconduct. So instructional support, we've already talked about this extensively, but we have, there's 3 centers that serve different populations within the Whiting School. We need to forget about what the name of those centers, it's irrelevant. What we need to think about is what we can do to support you. And so we have instructional designers, multimedia technicians, and instructional technologists, as well as faculty members who are part of the CER. All of this means that it doesn't matter who you contact or how you contact us, we are triaging and communicating to make sure that we can support you for whatever your need is. So you can email the CER web, or you can email the address that Michael sent out yesterday, which is Design Lab Remote. Again, it doesn't matter how you contact us, we're here to support you all. And again, we've talked about some of this, but the additional resources, virtual live services and software resources. This was something that Mike Reese shared earlier, so I appreciate this, Mike. I think this came from a CASAS faculty member, but the more we can start to curate examples or things that you're thinking about and share that with you all, I think the easier it will be for everyone to think through some of the challenges. And so if you have them, please share them, and we'll look to publish them on the CER website so that they're accessible to everyone. So with that, I will stop talking and Michael, Sri, I don't know if you want to jump in here or layer in.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things that we need to hear, Sri and I in particular, is what are the things that you're considering? And I would just encourage you to think ambitiously, like if there are ways that we could, you know, be sending students materials through the mail that would help them complete some kind of hands-on activity, but you don't have the resources in your department to do that. If I know that, Sri and I can talk to the dean and see whether those sorts of resources could be made available. If certain kinds of remote activities, research activities, independent projects need to be supported by staff, and the staff are now taking on an instructional role they wouldn't otherwise take on, but you think that's possible, you know, let us know how we can support that. We need to hear what you're thinking about, what the creative strategies are. So yeah, I just wonder if anybody has ideas or things that are on their mind, issues that are coming up in thinking about the courses that you're going to have to teach or how we can support you. That would be great.
So hi, Michael, this is Rich Middlestat.
Hi.
So most of our activities that get done in our manufacturing center, we're probably not going to be able to
do it because it all involves the hands-on training, and that's a safety precaution. And we're more or less doing that so that the students can have access to that equipment. So on that aspect of it, we're just going to kind of put that on hold, and that will only be used for faculty and staff that are on campus. One thing that I am doing right now is I'm teaching the manufacturing course through mechanical engineering, and that is comprised of a bunch of labs that they make a Stirling engine with all the different components. My plan for that is to do exactly what we've been talking about here, is do as much of that as I can, probably through the Zoom portal, where I am personally in front of the piece of equipment and I'm kind of being guided by what the students tell me to do based on what I'm educating them on should be done in each different lab. And then my hope is that at the end of the lab, whatever parts I produce for those particular students, I can then mail to them, and then the next lab, they would have them in front of them, and we could assemble things through the Zoom portal at that point. And at the very end, they have all the products, we do a final assembly, and we teach them about why they did certain things during the labs. Okay, I mean, that's the best solution that I have, and it kind of is a compromise. It does as much as we can online with as much materials, but they still get to do some interactive with the components that are mailed to them.
Yeah, I think my understanding is that many of the other courses that you offer or learning opportunities involve training students to be able to use the manufacturing facility, and that they're not really taking those for credit. They're not required for them to complete their program. So is that true?
That's correct. I mean, a lot of it, I know some courses, Nathan Scott's senior design program through mechanical engineering, he now requires all of his students to go through several of our trainings. We have some things that we can do online for that. We can kind of do some feedback, but they're not going to be able to do the in-person trainings, and we can't give them access to the equipment based off of an online training through video. It still needs to be demonstrated in person. So those types of things will probably have to be put on hold. We'll probably try and create some standard videos that may assist in kind of doing this in a lot faster manner. If the university does open back up, maybe a 3-hour training would then turn into an hour demonstration after they've done the online video and assured us that they know the safety precautions that they're going to take.
Right. Yeah, I think we're much more sensitive to what's happening with classes that are, students need in order to complete their program and graduate. Of course, it's not ideal for any of the trainings not to be able to happen, but yeah, we're hoping that all the credit-bearing classes and all the ones that are required for majors we're able to sustain them during this remote period.
Right, I agree. I'm going to focus mainly on the manufacturing course that I'm instructing right now,
right,
through mechanical engineering, because that is a accredited course that they need. So my focus will be on that, and on the back burner, I'll be doing the videos when we have time to do additional trainings and things.
Great.
Rich, just on that, Nathan can talk about the technology. I know he's in the process of ordering some kind of high definition cameras. If you need anything like that, so that it's really clear to the students, because sometimes with low quality, materials, it blurs out, it isn't as clear. So if you need any of that, please feel free to reach out to me or Nathan, and we'll try and get you set up.
Yeah, I will do that. I think it would be really beneficial to have a nice high quality camera as well as a stand that I could move around and have it remotely inside of our facilities.
Yeah, that sounds like a cool approach to that class. And I was just thinking about it. I know we're sort of in tactical mode, but if you did have time to think it through, this is stuff you could repurpose later on potentially. If the video is good and you feel good about the instruction, this could be, whether it's prereq type of material or just refresher stuff. I would think about potentially repurposing, how you could repurpose this down the road if you have the bandwidth to do that.
I agree. We actually moved a good portion of the lecture of this course online. So the lectures themselves are actually pre-recorded. So now the only hands-on experience was the lab that I'm teaching, and we're just going to have to do the same exact thing with that. But again, I think mailing the materials to the students gets that hands-on approach, and they can interact with me while, through the video of the Zoom.
I would just mention that this had come up in the prior conversation that both Nathan's group and the CER have equipment that faculty can borrow, cameras, microphones. So please make use of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Michael, we're actually thinking about putting, if Mike Reese is okay with that, storing the material there for you to pick up from them.
Yeah, that's fine for equipment to be here, but while both centers are available, since we're serving both Krieger and Whiting, I mean, I think they're for special projects like this that are going to be in depth. It might be good to work with Nathan's staff to actually help you produce those materials as well. But of course, if you want to do it on your own, you're welcome to borrow the equipment directly and take care of it yourself.
I had a question along a similar line. So I'm in a similar situation with essentially the lectures have been moved online. Oh, this is Jess Dunleavy. I teach cell and tissues engineering. So it's essentially hands-on cell culture experience, which just can't be shipped, can't be done remotely. A bit of a mind struggle to figure out how to approach it. So having not necessarily a camera, but someone operating it. If I have to be gloved up and inside a hood, I can't be moving around a camera, making sure that things aren't getting a glare off of glass or anything. So I didn't know what kind of dedicated staff would be available. It's 2 different 2-hour sections, and I realize 3 times a week is probably not reasonable for actual videography, but actually coordinating that sort of situation where I would have someone with me beyond just the TA who could grab things so that I could make sure to be filming something reasonably while interacting with the students and having them, again, direct my motions inside of the culture hood would sort of be the ideal learning scenario, although obviously not reasonable every time. And then mixing that with some of the already produced material that the Online Learning Center has done for the cell and tissue course that's offered online is, I think, the split that we're looking at right now, but figuring out how to get some of that into recorded material that, of course, you guys could then totally go back and take to the cell and tissue people. So you can have a video of like people at Hopkins doing cell culture to go along with that. I mean, we can repurpose it if we bring someone for actual recording and get something of a higher quality, but I don't know what sort of staff is available for that. And I would love, I don't know if that's a one-on-one conversation kind of thing, but I wanted to put my
you're ahead of the game in your thinking there. I don't know if we'll have capacity. We'll see. I mean, we'll offer as much capacity as we have to you in these situations, and we'll see how many other folks. I think it's a good idea, but if we could pinpoint like the ones that you'll most need us there for, we do have multimedia technicians. We have high-end gear, and if you reach out to us. I think Paul will show that email design.
One of my TAs, if you're willing to let them do it, is probably enough as well, but making sure that we have some level of training on it ahead of time for that sort of needing to be more than just one person in a clean room kind of instruction. Makes
a lot of sense. Yeah, if you just reach out, we'll schedule it.
Nathan had also mentioned in the prior session that an instructor who was doing electronics demonstrations they had fashioned a camera on a gooseneck that could be clipped to various supports so that it could be positioned in ways that were fortuitous for whatever he was working on at the time and then repositioned as needed. I also don't know if you've ever had people who've done interactive learning using like a head-mounted GoPro, or I don't know, that's just they're waiting to happen, or if that's a possible thing.
I love that idea. I mean, I was just ordering stuff, and there was a lot of people who recommended that with they basically use your camera. I mean, you use your phone. So if you have an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy, you open up the Zoom app, put it on your head, and it's recording just with the rest of the Zoom session, and now you have like an action movie.
Yeah. Okay. Those are definitely worth considering. I'm like taking notes of all of the various things that exist, and there were a few obvious links on your curated set for things that were obvious, like the Jove educational lab techniques is going to be probably my bread and butter, but very useful. Thank you.
Sure. Great.
This is Jeremy Brown. Really quickly, I teach a the course I teach in the mechanical engineering department is mechatronics, and it's kind of a course that's split half and half. We spend the first half of the semester doing lab assignments, like in lab assignments. Then the second half, which generally starts right after spring break, is mainly an open-ended kind of project course where we come up with like the parameters for some, in this case, robotic system that the students need to build, and they're kind of let to go into the lab and use whatever resources we have in the lab to build a robot to kind of complete that objective. And so I'm still trying to wrap my brain around how I could like even do something remotely, similar to that kind of in a remote environment. One of the questions that I had is I like the idea of kits. Part of one of the learning objectives for the class, though, is it's a little bit of trial and error, and that's the purpose, is to, let students try something, let it fail, not work, and then try again. And I'm not exactly sure how you, box that into a kit, right? Because the kit is a solution. You just need to figure out how to put it together. And the idea of the class is to actually allow the students to kind of come up with their own creative solution that isn't, let's say, predetermined in some way by me as the instructor. And so I feel like that was my initial reaction. I'll put together a kit, but then I thought that really stifles kind of what one of the real learning objectives of the course is to take this open-ended problem and come up with a solution that is uniquely theirs. And I'm still trying to figure out how I could make something like that happen.
Could you put that sounds like a fun class. Could you put it in their hands? And, so one of the constraints we all run into is cost. So could you say one of the challenges of this is it can't cost more than, I have no idea what it would cost, but $50 or something. And then you give them some parameters, and I don't know, again, I don't know the budget of this class or the parameters or whether they would have to pay for it, but.
That's a good point. My question would be, is there any room, if students wanted to, let's say, assuming that supply chains and things maintain stable, right? Come up with a list of objectives and say, here are the suppliers that you can order from, order the parts that you need. Because this is what we do kind of in the classroom environment, right? I order from the DigiKeys, the McMasters, everything like that. And students then work, they're working in teams. I have to change it a little bit so that they can work individually. And the other thing I'm thinking about is all of the support resources. We, like Rich was saying earlier, we have access to the 3D printers, the laser cutters, the machine shop that they will not have access to, but there are outsourcing, there are companies where you can outsource your 3D printing and things like that, right? And so, my worry was that if I try to come up with what that kit is and then try to ship it to the students, that doesn't really meet the learning objective. But then, am I allowed to kind of give the students the, kind of freedom to say, hey, I'm going to order this and order that, knowing that I will get reimbursed, essentially by the university in some way for, assuming these costs right now. And then that's assuming the students have the, let's say, liquid, cash to be able to do that right away. So I don't know. It's a lot of things that I'm trying to figure out.
Right.
Could I jump in real quick with a couple of ideas? One is, I know the build is such an important part of going through the trial and error and seeing something that doesn't work out. But maybe just the design aspects of possibly putting together a CAD drawing or conceptually describing what they would have done that you can give feedback on, and maybe have them go through several iterations of obvious things that you think might not work. Another, and I know that's probably a bit of a stretch, but while kits tend to be used to build to exact instructions, sometimes the materials that are in them, you could tell them to be creative within the bounds of what's in the kit. They don't necessarily build what it was originally designed for, and so you can provide them some constraints around the build based on what you give them as opposed to necessarily what they want to come up with.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe instead of, maybe we send them, my idea kit was a little bit too constrained. Maybe I send them a box of Legos. Yeah. Where you can kind of build whatever you want out of it, right?
Yeah.
Like a Lego Mindstorm kit or something like that. It has maybe standardized equipment like a motor and some stuff, but then they get to build whatever. I don't know. That's actually a good point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to think about it. It's like old Legos versus new Legos. I don't know. I'm so old. When we bought Legos, it was just a big box of bricks of different sizes. right?
Exactly.
There was no instructions about how to turn it into a death spell.
And
So,
real quick, another idea, Jeremy, just, and I don't want to riff too long because I know there's other people, but I had some conversation with CTY, and I believe they have some courses on robotics. So I could maybe put in a call to them and see what they're doing. I know that'd be at a very different level, but maybe a
But, I mean, that'd be great. Even if, even if it's just a baseline to which I could build from, that would be great. Yeah, right now I'm just struggling to figure it all out, but that would be helpful.
I think a few things I did want to touch on in what you just mentioned, Jeremy. First of all, I don't think there's any reason students couldn't be ordering the supplies or parts they need to have them delivered to their home. I think just logistically, the way that would have to happen is students would submit their orders directly to you or to an administrator in your department who would have to submit the order.
And we would be allowed to ship it to their home address. I mean, because I know that there are rules about like shipping outside the university right now.
Yeah, we'd have to investigate. So I could look into whether we could allow shipping outside.
Yeah, and then the other thing would be if they purchase themselves, getting tax exempt.
Right, I think it would be better for the ordering to be done inside the university, to have that centralized, but perhaps shipped to students' homes, if we could arrange that. I mean, the other part of that is that we'd have to talk to the department about the workload on the administrative staff and whether there are ways to assist with that. The other piece I wanted to comment on was that I think Rich Mejia might be on the line. And so we have this makerspace that has a 3D printer, that has a laser cutter, and has some staff, not a lot of staff, but some staff, and they're probably not going to be having a lot of visitors, right? So they may be able to help with some of this if we interface with them, whether students could send them specs or whatever input files are needed for the 3D printer, and they could run some jobs and then mail them to students or to the laser cutter or the other equipment. So, we have some technical staff that could be dedicated to helping students realize some of their designs.
So Michael, this is Rich Middlestadt. Rich Mejia popped off. I know he had a couple other obligations, but as well as the makerspace being at a lower capacity than normal because we don't have the students in there, that is one definitely potential thing that we could do. Also, our manufacturing center, I want everyone to keep in mind that we have all those capabilities available to us, and we do not mind machining or producing anything that a student normally would make on their own for them if they send us the specifics of how they want that done. We currently are doing that since we've kind of closed off all of our self-service areas temporarily. I have a lot of orders coming in where we're kind of just logging in as the user normally would. So they still get, charged out the normal rate for using the equipment for the self-service cost. And we just kind of do that for them. And we also have a lot of other industry partners that we partner with to get reduced prices on things like that. So Stratasys is another one that we use where we could send a large quantity of parts to be 3D printed or something like that. We can get them for a much cheaper rate than a lot of other places. So I want everyone to keep us in mind if they need anything produced in a manufacturing standpoint, please come to our center so we can at least evaluate that and see what we can do for you.
This is Scott Paul, and I have a lot of the same challenges that Jeremy does with a couple additions, and that in my class, the students have been working since the spring, first on identifying the clinical need that they were going to do a solution for, and for this first half of the semester, trying to work towards the design, the actual build that they're going to do, and the testing. One thing I would encourage is these resources that you guys have talked about. If there could be a one-stop link where we can go to those resources and say, these are the resources we have on campus that students can utilize remotely, that'll be helpful. And also, my students are working as teams, and I'm working on teams, and they each have a unique solution. So it's not like I can give them a new challenge now and build this. They've been working on this for a semester and a half. So I wonder if, in addition to letting them remotely fabricate after working on CAD design, CAD drawings and things like that, if there could be some way that they can utilize, again, as Jeremy said, assuming the supply chain does not break down and we're not going into Mad Max, mode, that they can mail parts and partially completed designs between each other so that they can still collaborate on the build, because they're not all going to be in the same place.
Yeah, and do you see that as primarily like a financial issue? Like, how do we reimburse them for shipping? How do we enable them
to
shipping?
Or if they're given a FedEx number that can be monitored to make sure they're not, and that they can just send the parts from one to the other potentially.
Right.
Because part of the goal of the class is to learn to work in a collaborative team on this sort of thing, like they might meet in industry.
Right. Yes, I can look into that. So in terms of the one-stop link, I think we're going to be using the CER's website that Mike had demonstrated as sort of the go-to page, and we'll probably try to build a link off that that's maybe specifically for lab design and project-based classes. So hopefully we can gather some of these resources together there.
I think that'd be great.
And I'll look into the mailing question.
And we're happy to do that. I think because Paul and Nathan are really leading this work and their teams, that I can work with them. I think they've already got a lot of resources that we can ask them hopefully to develop that. They've done a lot of great research already.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Other questions? Things we can do, I mean, either directly to assist with whatever you're thinking about with your course, or just in general to help the conversations continue so people are benefiting from the thinking that's going on.
I had a thought. Can you hear me? This is Nick.
Yeah, kind of.
Hi, everyone. So I teach a course similar to Jeremy and Scott's it's a capstone design course. And so this isn't going to work for all the teams, but what I'm thinking about for some of my teams is they need to be prototyping with things that are not going to be practical to mail to their homes, things that are sometimes $1,000 or a few $1,000s in stuff. And also there's now 8 people per team in my class. So it wouldn't be practical to send 8 copies of something that are a few $1,000 to everyone's home. So I'm thinking some of these projects, we would have the parts sent here and have TAs start to assemble with instruction and maybe video links with the students to virtually do some experiments and building with their systems. So this would assume that our graduate students that are TAing are going to be back in action in the coming weeks. And I'm not sure how safe that assumption is, but at least this would allow the teams to do some of the prototyping that might not be practical at home.
Yeah, I think well, at this point, the indication is that we should expect to have the graduate students still on campus. So hopefully, and particularly if they're already employed as TAs, then that's should hopefully not be a problem, other than the technical details associated with shipping things back and forth and recording things. I think one of the questions that came up in the prior session was, what if we don't have the staff? It's a course where we maybe wouldn't have TAs or wouldn't have enough TAs, and there are some other staff, maybe technical staff or postdocs, who might be pulled into this activity from what they would otherwise do. And the question had been raised whether there would be resources to pay part of their salary that was shifted into the instructional mode. And that's one of the things I'm going to investigate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that would be great. So that was, I didn't bring it up, but I had my graduate students, they have some related skills, and it would be, I think, a nice, it would be an ask for them, but it would be good for the students to have some of my graduate students be helping with their experiments that they would normally be doing on campus.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well,
I had one last suggestion related to this, and that's if on that CER site, if people have additional ideas and concepts, I won't say they're best practices, but functional practices, that there be some sort of discussion group or listserv or something that of all the design related instructors, because somebody in NetKey might have an idea that'd be relevant to BME or vice versa, things like that.
So I know Brian Cole in the earlier session had mentioned that he's already working on a kind of repository for what I think functional practices is probably the right term. I'm not sure. They're best practices, but sort of the snapshots of what different faculty around campus are doing. One of the asks I had requested of him was whether we can keyword those, so maybe design and lab activities can be pulled out specifically. But I think there's the other part of your question, which is whether we can foster those discussions. And Elizabeth Logsden had brought up that there are like some particular learning objectives that are maybe seem particularly vexing in design teaching. Like, how do we meet that learning objective when we don't have the students in an actual design space? And so I'm hoping we can gather examples of those and use that as a kickoff set of workshop ideas. So we can get together, have another gathering of lab and design instructors, and maybe pose a question to work on together during that time about how would we meet these particular learning objectives that we're struggling to figure out how to meet remotely.
Michael, would Teams be a good tool for doing that? I mean, we're happy to post best practices, but for the instructors here and the others who are navigating this day by day, Teams might be a little quicker in sharing best practices.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. If yeah, maybe we can get somebody to help set up a Microsoft Teams, I don't know what you call it, group team, I guess.
Team.
The team has a group, yeah.
And ask the people who participated, or just maybe send out a broadcast email with inviting to ask for people to join. And then we can organize through there. Good. Okay, so I think we're come to the end of the time. I'm happy to stay on if people have additional questions or things they want to discuss, but if not, maybe we'll wrap up.
All right, well, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate this. I'll let you know what I find out, and I'll pass on any information that I plan on doing.
Great. And thanks everyone for taking the time.
This has been great.
Thanks everyone. Bye now.
Thanks. Really helpful.
Thank you.